All right, guys. Hello and welcome to the Irish NFL podcast. This is not for our everyday listeners on audio. This is going to be just for our social media channels. And this is a new segment that myself and Brian have decided to kickstart. This is the Friday Redzone, Brian. You and I, we've decided we don't need our partner in crime, Mark Cockrell, during the week. He's too busy. So we said we'd touch base on a Friday morning, catch up on a few more, I suppose, general points within the NFL and see how our weeks have been going.
Yeah, certainly, Gordon. There's so much going on in the NFL these days. One podcast doesn't seem to do itself justice just these days with all the information changing and an evolving season. But Mark's too busy for us. We get one night a week off.
Yeah. He has it scheduled in along with all his other commitments in life, and that's just about it. So look, we're going to kind of free flow this a little bit. We've sent across a few talking points that we wanted to touch base on, and I suppose as a Friday morning, there's no better place to start with the first one, which is the Atlanta Falcons against the Panthers last night. I made a couple of points. Big win for the Atlanta Falcons, and only for last week's, I suppose, girly I don't know what happened there. Raheem Morris will be 3-0 as the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And then the second point I've made on this is that another massive week with another NFL quarterback hit to the head. That was just disgusting to see and, put Bridgewater out of the game for quite a while.
Yeah, we'll come to the hit in a minute. It was very nasty, but in a way, you still have to feel sorry for Dan Quinn because the Falcons are such a good team. Like, Genie Mac, they lost that game against the Cowboys. They threw away the game against the Bears. They threw away last week's game, in a fashion that we haven't seen before. And then they go and beat Minnesota and they beat a Panthers team that have been doing well this season. So it's a season it's definitely what could have been season for the Falcons. It's mad. But a great win. That hit was nasty. Bridgewater out of game, came back in, didn't look right after that. I imagine the NFL will be catching up with those players.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of creeping back into the NFL this year, and I don't know if it's due to a lack of a preseason or what, but again, we're starting to see more of these really, really dirty late quarterback hits that were gone for the game for a few seasons. So Charles Harris has been, he was ejected from the game. I'm assuming he's going to get a fine because I've seen the hit. Bridgewater was on the ground. He wasn't even sliding at this stage. He was on the ground and basically got a shoulder to the head. So yeah, look, it's awful. But as we say, the NFL have kicked it out previously. I think they're going to have to crack down again because it does seem to be coming back into the game. Second one that I want to... Sorry, go on.
No, you're right. I was just going to say the same thing. He had given up. Where Dalton last week was going down when Bostic went in. You could argue he should have pulled out, but this one last night, I think the intention was there to try get Bridgewater out again.
Okay, second point that we want to touch on today, Brian, is Odell Beckham and the Cleveland Browns, my so-called second team, although my love for them is diminishing this season as the Steelers are on an absolute winning streak at the moment. But Odell Beckham has gone down with an ACL injury. He's gone for the rest of the season. And I suppose with the trade deadline fast approaching us, the question is, do Cleveland Browns trade for a wide receiver? Do they need a wide receiver? And I suppose the big piece of this is there's a lot of wide receivers potentially on the trade block at the moment. A few names that I've taken note of are Golden Tate with the Giants, Alshon Jeffrey with the Eagles, and pretty much the entire Texans wide receiver room is probably up for grabs at the moment. I suppose there's a massive cap hit for the Browns if they were to do this. Plus, they have two young and up-and-coming wide receivers. What does the Cleveland Browns do, who are in the chase for a playoff spot?
I think one wide receiver that could certainly be on the trading block, and in all likelihood, the Browns won't get him because he's in division, and that's AJ Green from the Bengals. I think he's actually one we should be certainly adding to the list. Yeah, Peoples-Jones scored a touchdown last weekend, so as you said, they've got young players, but it's difficult to see how they can put off trades at this stage. And who do they go for that's going to fit into the system? Because you need a player on the outside that's going to over the top player, shall we say, because that's what Beckham can give you. I'm not sure where they go and get that player.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones based on the cap. I think between Landry and Beckham, they have approximately 30 million tied up for next season and stuff. So there's not a huge amount of money to play with. And then obviously with the cap reducing next year, they would really be looking to just find a stopgap for the rest of this season.
The Golden Tate one is an interesting one. Yeah, I certainly think the Giants are trying to move him on. But you'd have to pay him $4 million for the rest of the year. He got playing the slot, but then That tight end did reasonably well in the slot last weekend. The rookie Bryant scored 2 touchdowns. So maybe they just go with the flow and they go with what they have and do their best to make the playoffs with what they have. They're 4-2 and they're going in the right direction. 5-2, even better.
Moving on then, next big talking point I wanted to bring to your attention, Brian, is Gardner Minshew has been reported to have multiple fractures in his thumb. Apparently, based on reports, has had it for quite a while, but only informed the team recently. So only informed them this week, apparently. They're obviously on a bye for week 8. They then have the Texans coming up for week 9, and their backup quarterback is the great Mike Glennon.
It's funny because last week before the Chargers game, a lot of people were thinking that Minshew was on his last legs in terms of if he doesn't play well, they're going to drop him anyway. Now I think we're starting to see the reasons why he hasn't been playing too well because he's been carrying these injuries. The problem is, as you touched on, Mike Glennon, like he's so overrated. He's made a good few quid out of the Chicago Bears last year, and he's turned out to be kind of a one-hit wonder. Do you take a chance on him, or do you try, like you said before the deadline, try to get someone in on a cheap contract that's kind of a backup somewhere else, possibly, but there's not many good backups out there you can go after that you could potentially get a trade with.
I think the criticisms that have been kind of thrown at Minshew over the last few weeks was that he was really struggling with the deep ball. So does this answer one of those criticisms about his game at the moment was, he's been playing with a banged up thumb and hasn't been able to do it. And then to the Mike Glennon piece, yeah, he's not the savior that you'd want in Jacksonville. But I think we all knew as well, Jacksonville are kind of in that race for tanking for Lawrence.
I was just going to say, yeah, we all expected them to tank. But then they beat the Colts week 1 and we thought, maybe they're better than we expected. And they played well up against the Tennessee Titans. But yeah, they might find themselves now thinking towards the future and going, right, let's see what we can do in order to assure ourselves of, it's not just Lawrence. There is 2 or 3 other quarterbacks coming through that potentially could be upgrades on what they have. So interesting to see whether Minshew will be ready for Texans on Sunday week.
Yeah, our pre-draft analysis coming into the season will probably be QB heavy this year, which I think you and I are both looking forward to.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly be in the mix, hoping that the Giants can get their hands on Lawrence, but we'll probably win ourselves 2 or 3 games and kill that opportunity.
Brian, a really interesting one that I wanted to bring to your attention: the Cowboys, Jerry World, Mike McCarthy. What in God's name is happening? Rumors are coming out that Mike McCarthy is one of the head coaches that we would expect to be on the hot seat after 7 games through the season. But realistically, he's not, is he?
I don't believe so. I think Jerry Jones will certainly give him another year. There's been so many things that have gone wrong for him. They have, I suppose, majority of your own injuries. And a lot of players have been injured. And obviously, Prescott's gone for the season and Dalton, potentially won't play this weekend. I think they'll write this season off. I think he'll make changes in the backroom staff in terms of his coordinators because Nolan, the defensive coordinator, he'll certainly be gone. The defense is a shambles. But it doesn't look good. Like you said, the players are all coming out and they're saying the wrong things about the head coach. For a new head coach to have that after 6 or 7 games, you have to wonder what he was doing in that man cave that he kept going on about for a year, that he was reinventing himself as a new style NFL coach and not the one that people felt he was towards the back end of his days in Green Bay. It's mad. But again, to the point, the division is so bad. If they were to beat the Eagles on Sunday, which, look, I don't see it happening, but in this world of NFL, you never know. They'd be top of the division again, and then all of a sudden it's like, will the Cowboys push on? So who knows? It's mad.
So I suppose 3 points I want to throw at you, or is it 3 reasonings behind Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys? Is it down to 1, the injury-ravaged season they've had across the board? Is it 2, Aaron Rodgers hit a lot of the qualities that Mike McCarthy didn't have? Or was it 3 that he simply just has not evolved, as you mentioned, when he was in that man cave for the last year, because something is missing? And I think everyone keeps throwing their new defensive coordinator under the bus in terms of having not coached in the NFL for quite a long time. But, out of those 3, is a kind of, which one would stand out for you?
I think I'd stick with the injury front because, in fairness to McCarthy, albeit he was a bit outdated at the end, he still won a lot of divisions, got them to the playoffs a lot of times, and he won a Super Bowl. So you have to think within all the madness, there is a good head coach there who just needs to be given time to bed things in. But as for just a touch on a funny note with Nolan, I mean, you saw his press conference this week. The poor chap couldn't even do the press conference without putting spicy food in his eyes and obviously having to call off press conferences. It doesn't bode well for a coach who's trying to, kind of turn things around. It doesn't look
I
good at all.
I 100% thought that was a meme or fake news about him getting hot sauce in his eyes. I was like, oh, like if you're him, you have to be sitting there going, Jesus, I really am not doing myself any justice here. But look, that's Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys. The Andy Dalton era. Probably no news on whether he's going to be back for the next game. So yeah, I think Mike McCarthy's had a tough run as the new head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. But again, he had that when he was in Green Bay for that first year. So look, probably one more year in it, but it's interesting that the media are circling him now to see whether or not he is one of the head coaches on the hot seat.
Yeah, and the Dallas media is one of the frenzies. The frenzy in the NFL in Dallas is always crazy. You lose a couple of games, the place goes into meltdown. So yeah, he's certainly under pressure.
Brian, last 2 points. First one, we're coming a bit closer to home for you. The Giants have tested positive. An unnamed offensive lineman has tested positive. Apparently, all of his close contacts, bar 4 offensive linemen, have had to quarantine or isolate themselves for a few days, etc., while they get tested. This obviously doesn't bode well for Judge and the Giants and the sort of season you're having, especially for that playoff run that you're hoping for.
It doesn't bode well for Monday night against the Bucs, who have just come off a game where there's the exact same scenario with the Raiders offensive line. The entire Raiders offensive line for 3 or 4 days for self-isolating. No good preparation for a game against a very hot Bucs team. It turns out it's Will Hernandez who's tested positive. He's gone now for a few weeks. But thankfully, the rest of the offensive line have tested negative and they're back in today. So the Giants might have a better preparation than the Raiders did prior to last week's game. But look, the Giants have managed to dodge a bullet for so long. Most teams have in terms of the COVID situation. It was inevitable it was going to catch up at some stage. As I said on the other podcast, Gordon, whether we had a COVID situation or a non-COVID situation, I don't see any scenario where the Giants are going to be able to beat the Bucs on Monday night.
Yeah. Well, look, at least it means the playoff train for the Giants is still on its tracks somewhat for the time being. And look, Brian, the Friday Red Zone with the Irish NFL podcast, it's a new segment for us. We obviously want all of our listeners and followers on social media to give us some feedback, only if it's nice, of course. But the final segment of the week, this one is going to be for our good friend Mark Cockrell and his New England Patriots. Reports coming out that pretty much anyone and everyone on the roster of the New England Patriots is up for trade. Like, what does that say, or what does that mean for New England Patriots for the rest of this season, but more importantly for next season?
Well, Mark was all cock a hoop and having a bit of a slagging at the Giants today, but the reality is Patriots are 2-4, and they're going away to the Bills this weekend. Edelman has since the podcast had a knee operation, so he's gone for the foreseeable. So I think this is a situation like what we touched on with the Jags, and the Patriots looking ahead to the future and saying, you know what, this season is a write-off. We've realised the quarterback Cam isn't the quarterback of old, and we maybe start considering our options for next year, putting all these players out for possible bait in terms of getting traded before the deadline. And the one which is really interesting, which is the one Mark obviously lists as the best cornerback in the league, Stephen Gilmore. They're saying that he's up for a trade, which is a real surprise because you'd be thinking that whatever about the future, they'd be trying to keep hold of their best players. He's supposed to be one of the best cornerbacks in the league. So interesting to see him up for grabs.
So I think the interesting piece on Gilmore was that they brought forward some of his salary from last season or for next season into this season to kind of, I suppose, keep him happy in his position at the moment. But I think for next season, he counts for something in around 17 million against the cap. It's something ridiculously high. So I think for the Patriots, they're probably in the phase where they're kind of going, how do we rebuild? As you said, they're missing a lot of pieces. They do have players due to come back. Again, off the top of my head, not fully sure how that works to the salary cap. But I think most teams are really struggling because I think the salary cap for next season is due to drop to 146 million.
From 160 hours.
Yeah, something like that. So it's the first year it's going to go down, and it's only going to confirm it's going to drop for 1 year. But again, depending on how affected teams are, because apparently 50% of their revenue is domestic revenue that they make within their own regions. Like this, we could see this drop for multiple years. So I think in the business of football, it's going to be a really interesting behind the scenes stuff the rest of this season and next season that we will definitely touch on this segment because I think
that'd be right up your street, Gordon.
Look, it's the stuff I love to talk about. You know that, Brian. But I think that's that's why we've created this segment. So look, That's the Friday Red Zone with the Irish NFL podcast. This is episode 1, first take, and I think we've touched on some nice points. And look, it's an exciting weekend. Before we sign off, give me the one game other than your Giants, which obviously you're not really looking forward to, against Tampa. What's the one game you're looking forward to this weekend?
I'd say Seattle against the 49ers, a division that's stacked with some great teams at the moment, all above 500, all potentially plugging for a playoff spot. So these games are going to be key in terms of who gets in, because I think 3 teams will come out of the division. But San Francisco have come off 2 good wins against the Rams and against the Patriots last week. Seattle are coming off a defeat against the Cardinals. So I think it makes for a great game. It makes for a great game anytime during the season. And even the line in terms of the betting is -3 for Seahawks, so it is a tough one for the bookies to get a handle on. So I think that's could be the most enjoyable game of the weekend, Sunday evening, 9:30. Certainly the one to be looking out for.
Yeah, I'm glad. That was exactly the one I was looking forward to this weekend. So yeah, look, I think it's an exciting weekend. As we say, this has been the Irish NFL podcast, Friday Red Zone. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook. Make sure to give a listen to our podcast. We had a special guest on with Stephen from the Irish and UK Packers podcast. And yeah, that's us. So we'll see you next week for another episode of this.